We're going to get started with the last panel of the day. And we'll be talking about certainly the tribe's natural resource department. The presenters will be talking about, tribal forest and efforts and things that are ongoing. So I want to, first off, introduce Mike LaVoie. Mike LaVoie currently serves as the Natural Resource Director for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and has worked for the tribe since 2007. Mike was raised in upstate New York and has resided in North Carolina since his completion of an MS in biology at Western Carolina University. He worked for a variety of federal and state natural resource management agencies in Alaska, New York, North Carolina, and Tennessee prior to beginning work with the Eastern Band of Cherokees. Mike also currently serves as a regional director and vice president for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. So join me in welcoming Mike LaVoie to the stage. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share some of the great work we have going on. I'm going to start out today with some background regarding Cherokee's historic relationship to the region, as well as get into some of our present-day management framework. And then we're going to pass it off to Josh and Tommy, who are going to get in the weeds on some of our current forestry initiatives and kind of focus on traditional knowledge and community engagement. So, as Larry mentioned earlier today, the ancestral Cherokee homelands encompassed a huge swath of the southeastern United States. 8 states, over 120,000 square miles. So this is a map created by the Smithsonian in 1884, which shows, unfortunately, the gradual cession of lands to state governments throughout the year. So this began in 1721 with the first cession to the colony of South Carolina and culminated in the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. So as you can imagine, these homelands were extremely rich and situated in some of the oldest mountains in the entire world. The Appalachians are believed to be roughly 500 million years old, and they stretch from the high mountaintops of the Blue Ridge all the way to these very productive Tennessee River valleys. So as you can imagine, these abundant resources really allowed the tribe to develop a very complex and sophisticated society. The Southeast, when colonization occurred, contained some of the most dense populations of people in all of North America. And this Cherokee landscape was dotted with many towns spread across the region, often associated with mounds and often next to river systems. And the towns, it's pretty interesting. The towns were somewhat autonomous. There was a loosely organized government system where local chiefs really made decisions by persuasion and made an example of themselves in terms of leadership. And often decisions were required to be made by consensus. Cherokee was also a matrilineal culture and had a well-developed language system. As you see in the bottom left is a picture of Sequoyah, who developed the first tribal syllabary in 1821. So really, this was really the most literate society in all of North America in many ways, being able to read and write a written language through the syllabary. In addition to these mountains being very old, they're also some of the most biodiverse areas in all of temperate North America. The region has a very unique geology and dramatic topographic variations, and it's resulted in this tremendous biological diversity. And really, over 10,000 species within this region really were at the foundation of the Cherokee people and were intricately tied to who Cherokee were as people. Some of my photos here, there's on the top top left, there's a picture of a chestnut tree. So chestnuts were one of over 100 different tree species in the region. And this large mass-producing tree sustained both human food as well as wildlife ecosystems and was tremendously important to helping to create a very robust population of people. Fish like the sicklefin red horse you see pictured. Fish were also incredibly important to Cherokee diets and required intact forest systems and clean river systems to support fisheries needs. These red horse in particular are super important and really interesting in terms of providing these long migratory runs, so they would be very predictable and provide food resources after long winters. And then other species or other groups of animals like mussels and salamanders find their highest level of biodiversity in the whole world here in the Southeast. So mussels really help to create clean water for tribal peoples, and shells were used for different purposes. Salamanders, they're still really abundant and diverse here. And they were one example of a relationship with an animal that allowed for the passing of wisdom through generations. So I've been told that salamanders were viewed as a bioindicator, and it was recommended that you don't drink water unless it actually passes over a salamander's back. Crayfish, some crayfish were considered medicinal. And then the insect diversity is just incredible as well. The water beetle, seen kind of at the bottom of the photo there, is the central character in the tribe's creation story. And the water beetle was said to bring mud up and create the earth. And again, this is more wisdom that just teaches the vast importance of the small things and how these little pieces of our ecosystem are critical to not only persistence, but the creation of everything. And then bloodroot is a photo up there. That's one of over 1,400 flowering plants we have in the Southern Appalachians that provide food and medicine and today support many artisan resource needs. So as Tom mentioned earlier today, this was a very managed landscape, and it was managed through millennia of science. So Cherokee were very detailed empirical observationists. They passed wisdom down and actually did research to understand the environment and to understand how to manage the environment to make it as productive as possible for its citizens. So the relationships found within these ecosystems continue to persist today. So in the top, you'll see a picture of a river and a fish weir. As I mentioned before, towns were often associated with rivers. And rivers were both utilized, but they were also revered and respected as embodied entities. So the Cherokee legend of the Long Person or the Long Man creates a story where rivers have their heads in the mountains and their feet in the sea, and it's really an embodied ecosystem that has rights. It has the responsibility to be respected, and it's really cool. It's actually kind of a precursor of early watershed science, really, which is kind of adapted through Western approaches. And the fish weirs were interesting too. They still persist throughout our watersheds, and it's likely they were used to capture large quantities of fish, but it's also quite possible that they were used as scientific tools. Today many fisheries biologists actually install fish weirs to track fish, to understand fish. So it's highly likely that these were scientific tools that Cherokee used as well. So there's in terms of terrestrial landscape. We've got a picture of river cane. So the Southeast was once covered in these massive river cane breaks, so covering thousands of acres of riparian ecosystems. And these river cane breaks were critically important for tribal uses, for tools, for weapons, for just general personal items. I think somebody called it the duct tape of the woods at some point, but they're kind of used for everything. But these were also managed. These are disturbance-dependent systems, and it's thought that they were likely burned every 7 to 10 years. So again, some active ways to keep these really important resources on the landscape. As you can see in one of those middle photos, there's kind of a photo of an open woodland area. And I think it's important really to understand the myth of the eastern forests compared to what Cherokee saw. I think I heard somebody say once that, you know, back when colonization occurred, a squirrel could leap from tree to tree all the way from the coast to the Mississippi River. But that's really a fallacy, and it's also, you know, at the foundation of a lot of preservationist approaches of having a hands-off approach to the environment, which is very different than tribal perspectives. So this area consisted of many open areas. Our forest would look very different than what you see out here in this kind of even-age closed canopy systems. It was a mosaic of grasslands, of savannas, of wetlands, of old forests as well, that was actively managed by Cherokee peoples through fire, as well as natural disturbances with the weather and large ungulates like, you know, elk and bison and those sorts of things. So again, Cherokee were very heavy managers with fire. Lightning caused fire, but Cherokee actively burned to promote forest health, reduce pests, improve hunting and transportation and navigation through the woods. So it's fires were very, very common, which Tommy will get into some more details. And the tribe managed vegetation, would move vegetation to improve food availability. So, for example, we've got a picture of a wild strawberry there, and there's some early colonial records where they're saying, horses' hooves would actually get stained red walking through these strawberry fields that were likely kind of transplanted and manipulated to ensure that food was just incredibly abundant all throughout tribal homelands. And then Cherokee also had many common practices and rituals and rules about hunting, which led to the conservation of wildlife, and another critical component of that traditional management perspective. Unfortunately, as with all tribes, colonization has continued to result in just this extreme degradation and decline of our ecosystems here at Cherokee. Colonization, as well as associated things like diseases and slavery and market economy forces, you know, had these drastic impacts on Cherokee culture and the landscape and the ability of Cherokee to manage that landscape as they always had. Early impacts of the fur trade decimated wildlife populations. Beavers were removed, which resulted in wetlands being drained. The last bison, as you see there, although not really present in these mountains here, was still an important animal. That was the last bison, I believe, was killed in North Carolina in 1770. And then other animals like the deer and the elk, as well as predator populations quickly diminished. And then in the expansion of agriculture and the need to tie it to this new colonial market kind of changed the landscape as well. In the 20th century, though, we really saw some rapid changes, particularly here in the mountains, of that historic landscape. Through clear cutting our forests created huge problems in terms of decimating terrestrial habitat, but then also essentially destroyed a lot of our streams and rivers that contain really important fish populations. So that was a huge change in the 20th century. And then international travel soon brought the chestnut blight. It's believed that these hugely productive trees covered about 20,000 acres in the mid-1800s here on Cherokee lands, and those were all killed back. So that tree is now functionally extinct and has forever changed. That has forever changed the ability to really have a productive landscape. And then other impacts, such as the creation of large dams throughout the entire Tennessee River drainage, have continued to impact resources such as fisheries. So, and then in addition to all those impacts, the Cherokee were further dispossessed from their lands as Great Smoky Mountain National Park was established, and the Weeks Act was passed, and lands were taken into the forest reserve system. So these dramatic changes really altered Cherokee lifeways forever, and It's been a huge learning experience for me to understand kind of what's possible for this landscape through this historical lens. So of course, today's Cherokee land holdings look much different than that historic Royce map that you saw. And they're extremely diminished, but that said, they are relatively intact compared to a lot of areas in our country, particularly in the east. The tribe now has roughly 56,000 acres in trust in western North Carolina across 5 different counties. And there's a really unique land system here. Although this is all trust land, about 90% of that land is allotted to, and I shouldn't use the word allotment, 90% of that land is assigned to tribal members who have a right to essentially utilize that land. But that said, the timber and mineral resources still belong to the tribe as a whole. And then we have about 10% of our lands set aside as tribal reserve lands, which Josh will get a little bit more into. As you can see, we're up against Great Smoky Mountain National Park and the Blue Ridge Parkway, so some of those protected areas do help us in terms of supporting high water quality. And today, roughly 85% of our lands are still forested. So balancing kind of the natural resource conservation needs within today's lands is extremely challenging based on a variety of natural and ecological factors. But as you all well know, we have many competing socioeconomic needs. There's a housing crisis here, as with everywhere else. Healthcare and mental health is a huge need. And although our economy is based on tourism, it's always at a threat of overuse and abuse at times. So as well as where we're at, as you can see, it's kind of sad. If you go right across the boundary, you'll notice where that boundary line is, because there's these open agricultural fields. And then you go back to the tribe and you're pretty much either on the side of a mountain or you're in the middle of a really sensitive floodplain. So, developing and meeting broad tribal socioeconomic needs is a huge challenge to meet and still preserve our natural resources. And then, of course, with climate change and our fixed geographic boundaries, there's a huge threat to lose resources that may have range shifts due to climate change. So in short, just conservation based on the history and present situation is extremely challenging. So our role as a tribal agency really is critical in terms of both maintaining what we have and also helping to facilitate the relationships between the tribal community and these resources. So we as a government kind of continued to gain ground in exerting sovereignty and self-governance through the 20th century, as the tribe developed a fisheries program back in the 60s, which is really famous now. So that was kind of one of the biggest tribal government endeavors to manage natural resources. And then throughout the 90s, the tribe developed a natural resources program mainly focused on environmental programming through EPA grants. And then in the early 2000s, the tribe was able to start putting resources into conservation biology work as well. But we had a very big plan approved back in 2014, and it was an endeavor that really ran across the entire tribal government, creating an IRMP, which you all have heard of, but we call it our legacy plan. And the legacy plan was important because it was community-based, and it was also ratified by our tribal council. And a couple of components of that lead us to today, are the forest resource goals that were set out in that plan, which have helped shape our variety of different forest management tools, planning tools that we use today, which Josh will speak to. And then I think really importantly, which I've seen over the past decade to be of critical importance, was this chapter called the Zone of Influence. And it was really the first time that tribal government body insisted that we consider the resource needs not just within our statutory borders, but also this ancestral homeland. And what does it mean for us to have an influence on both access to resources and management of those resources outside of our traditional boundaries? So that said, in 2017, we created really our first integrated natural resources department, and that includes air quality, water quality, a regulatory compliance program, as well as fisheries and wildlife, and a kind of now a growing forestry program where we only have this, what you see at the table is essentially our forestry program. So we're still kind of in the works of working with BIA to pursue a 638 contract and really kind of continue to explore how we can build up something sustainably within our program. And it's been a challenge and a great thing to have all these different disciplines under one shop. I think as we continue to integrate water quality needs, air quality needs with our forestry program, I think we're set up for success having us all under one shop, but it's also, there's also a lot of challenges in terms of data management and communications, and stovepiping exists everywhere. So it's a good framework to begin with, but we've got a long way to go to really meet our ecosystem management needs. And then we do continue to really push forward with this kind of socio-ecological framework where we need to ensure that our work as a department is guided by the community. So we recently were able to form an elder advisory board, which really has been hugely instrumental in helping us define where we're going, particularly within that ancestral landscape outside of our borders. And then, it comes down to really ensuring that our actions are measured by how we are impacting the Cherokee community. So how are we supporting cultural revitalization? How are we supporting economic development and economic services, and really public health? So our work ultimately is tied to the health of the community and the health of people living here in Cherokee. And then partnerships. So, we work across the state, across the region, across the country, really, with state, federal, and tribal partners to meet these goals. So today, we're entering into a new phase with our department. The last few years have really amplified our abilities to work internally to exert sovereignty and ensure our resources are protected within our boundaries, but just as importantly, expressing sovereignty through access to resources and management influence over resources within this broader ancestral landscape. As you see, this is kind of a snapshot of western North Carolina, and there's a lot of federal land and a lot of land that used to be Cherokee. So we're just kind of really starting to dip our toes into how we can influence management, access resources, and really guide our public land managers from a tribal lens. A couple years ago, we were the first tribe in the southern region to develop a Tribal Forest Protection Act agreement, as well as a Good Neighbor Authority agreement, and that's really helped funnel some important resources into our department. It's helped us support staff development. Josh, our first tribal forester, is partially supported through a GNA agreement. And then it's also supported some really great projects. We're working now on a co-stewardship plan with the University of Michigan to really ensure our community is informing how we progress in working with the Forest Service in western North Carolina. We're also working on some exciting air quality monitoring projects tied to fire, and then watershed planning, and the GNA has been an incredible tool for us to kind of really leap forward in our partnership work. The national park, as you can see, pretty much surrounds the koala boundary. We have not always maintained the best relations with the park based on a complicated history, but we continue to work with them in more productive ways. We recently, I guess 5 or 6 years ago, signed a gathering agreement, one of the first in the nation to allow our tribal members to collect plants in the national park. It's a very burdensome process and needs a lot of improvement, but again, we're trying to explore more co-management and co-stewardship opportunities with the National Park Service. We work very closely with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission to manage animals like elk, as well as migratory fishes and rare species. So there's a a very strong partnership there. We're now engaged in helping them revise their wildlife action plan and ensuring tribal interests are really scattered throughout that entire document. And then other nonprofits, like you'll get to meet tomorrow, Mainspring Conservation Trust, partners like that and the Wilderness Society have been just instrumental in us acquiring private lands within this ancestral landscape to both protect cultural resources and access natural resources our tribal members are interested in. And finally, the university system has been a strong partner. We're currently working on a 5-year climate adaptation plan with NC State University, and it's really been a community-driven plan, a lot of oral history work. We're very lucky to get Vice Chief Larry Blythe to do an oral history for us to help us inform our planning efforts. So it's there's a lot going on in our department, a lot going on both on the tribe and with our partners, and we appreciate being here today to share some more details. So I'm going to invite Josh up next, and he can tell you a little bit more about our forest lands on the boundary.
Let me read Josh Parris, his biography. Josh Parris is the forestry manager at the Eastern Band of Cherokees, a newly established position as of October 2023. So the council hadn't had time to beat him up yet. Just give him time. Josh has a background in a variety of natural resource activities, including wildlife disease, endangered bat research and management, wildlife damage management, habitat management, natural resource education, invasive species control, and predator eradication. Josh is tasked with helping build the Eastern Band of Cherokee's forestry program and helping to steward the way forward on Eastern Band Cherokee Trust land, focusing on the development of sustainable forests with a focus on wildlife habitat, non-timber forest products, and overall ecosystem health. Well, join me in welcoming Josh Parris to the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be focused quite a bit more on what we're actually trying to get done here on the boundary itself, rather than the more overview that Mike gave, although they're closely tied for sure. So first thing, before we even start with the words, if you look at that slope map that we have, just of a small area, that entire picture probably covers about 350 to 400 acres. And there's very little less than 20%. And it's a difficult situation for us in getting to areas and creating different types of habitat that we would like to do. So that is going to be a map I'll get familiar with quite well in trying to figure out where these things are. But generally, so our forestry initiatives, so as Mike mentioned, we are planning to do 638 for the forestry program. There's a lot of things that go into that and a lot of things we need in order to get that moving forward. We also want to coordinate and expand partnerships with the BIA forest management, or fire management, excuse me, so that we can put more fire back on the landscape, which is what we all really want to do. And then our partnerships with Forest Service, as Mike mentioned, are really pushing some of this forward. We want to continue that, and I don't know that you mentioned the Code Stewardship Plan, but we are working for a Code Stewardship Plan with the Forest Service in North Carolina, U.S. Forest Service in North Carolina. And then we have multiple areas of tribal reserve that we've already planned to do restoration on. And quite frankly, the whole 6,133 acres, we would also like to expand into that for tribal restoration. And we got multiple cooperative agreements with NRCS to get some of that work done both on tribal reserve land and possessory holder land. And then finally, what Tommy will probably allude to quite a bit more is some native plant research and restoration, ramps, so-chan, also white oak, lots of many different things. Just generally a little more breakdown about our forest lands, our forest lands in general here. So total area of the boundary as of our last forest management plan was 56,893 acres and 49,000, and I can't read that, but 019, I think. So 86% of our land base is forested. So a substantial amount of forest. And of that, the vast majority of it, 90% of it, is in possessory holder. And the tribal reserve only amounting to about 6,000 acres, when there's a variability to that number, by the way, in multiple different places. But fairly large amount of our land in possessory holder, that small amount of tribal reserve is what we use communally. So that is a very small land base. And those of you who were on the chirp yesterday, Tommy pointed that out quite quickly, that with 16,000 people and 6,133 acres of tribal reserve, that's quite a problem. We've got multiple challenges. This is a short list of challenges, but I put forth some of these with managing on EBCI trust land. So multiple agencies. The map, I've got a map on the next page. We'll look at that in more detail, but there are multiple agencies that border, cut through, bisect within tribal lands, and they all have different issues, different things that we need to deal with. We have low capacity, so currently you're looking at the capacity, and yeah, it's not much. Market contraction around here. Most of you who are from anywhere in western North Carolina will know that we've had some significant issues. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then complex land management system, which Mike alluded to with the possessory holder system. So we got multiple agencies. I've listed a smattering of them here, but we've got 2 national parks, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Blue Ridge Parkway, directly adjacent, and then bisecting, surrounding and bisecting. Of course, Bureau of Indian Affairs holds Forestry Authority and Fire Authority here on the boundary, so we work within that. We also have working agreements with Fish and Wildlife Service and multiple endangered species that inhabit our forests. 4 bats as of now, Carolina Northern Flying Squirrel, multiple others. The U.S. Forest Service, we've got multiple agreements with them, and there are adjacent lands as well. So things to go with there. And then North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, North Carolina Forest Service, because those blue areas that you see on the map, those are actually state deeded lands. Those are not trust lands. So regulatory authority in wildlife and to some extent forestry management within those are going to come back a little bit to North Carolina Forest Service and Wildlife Resource Commission. And then Mainspring has been instrumental in not only a connection between adjacent lands, which we at Cabe Mound and Eagle Mountain, which we'll have a visit there tomorrow, help to purchase those lands and also have adjacent lands along beside them. So one of these issues is historic management. So high grading and lack of management in some areas particularly has changed the structure of our forest more toward, mesification, shade-tolerant species, less of the desired oak species and hickory species. And I just mentioned mesification, but that's what's going on. Also, lots of damaging agents, including overcrowding of our trees, overtopping of multiple trees, poor form on a lot of trees due to high grading and multiple other things, disease effects from multiple different pest species. Those in routes from national parks, parkways can bring pests in and out, invasive species in and out, mostly in. And then the fragmentation I speak of here is not necessarily fragmentation of the forest, like forest fragmentation, but fragmentation of the land base. We have bisected tribal reserve with a national park, and we have disjunct tribal reserve, disjunct lands in Cherokee County and Graham County that are surrounded by either Forest Service property or private landowner property that are not contiguous within our koala boundary. And then climate change uncertainty for sure for all of us, particularly in some of our high elevation areas where we've got 210 acres or so of red spruce habitat, which is Carolina Northern Flying Squirrel habitat. And what are the effects there? Uncertainty with those effects. Our low capacity, so we got a brand new program. So currently, it's just me technically that's in the forestry program. However, Tommy Cabe and Michael LaVoie have definitely been working forward on this forestry initiative for quite a long time in different capacities, funding, foundation of what we're going to do, and also the outreach and education and research. But from an operational standpoint, we're at ground zero. We lack equipment, people, training, you name it. We're lacking it, data, and so on. So we generally are, truly are at ground zero. And then the market contraction, so wanting to get some work done, get some trees down, do some forest work. We had a paper plant closure in Canton, as many of you may know or may not know. Main buyer pulp in all of the area. That's resulted in closures of sawmills, loggers being out of job, other forestry workers being out of jobs. If we want to complete this work, who's going to do it? Who's going to haul it? Who's going to saw it? Where's it going to go? And that's just something that, quite frankly, I don't think any of us have an answer for right now. And there is a forest sector support organization that we are participating with that's trying to, number one, study the effects of this, and then also what we are going to do to counteract it, if we can. And then we've already touched on the complex land system, but just to point out that BIA holds authority for forestry. They're operating in TAMs, so TAMs doesn't match with possessory holder, and they overlap, intersect, multiple owners. It just adds another layer of complexity, on top of the fact that we have different types of land, including state deeded land and tribal reserve land and possessory holder land, all mixed into the bunch. So it's a quite difficult process. A little bit on our forest management plan, which followed the legacy plan, and three main goals. So mainly is to manage for healthy forests, productive forests, with structural components of diversity, good structure of forest, and silvicultural methods that will help us produce more culturally important resources in perpetuity, because that's what we want to do. And then number two is to expand the role of sustainable forest management to our possessory holders, which hold 90% of the land base. And in order to do that, we need to have a good structure of what we're doing within tribal reserve lands in order to push that forward into possessory holder. And it's also going to be a different mechanism that will allow us to do that, because control doesn't solely rest with the tribal agency. And then protect and conserve public resources for forest management, both for tribal reserve, possessory holdings in general, so a protection phase as well. A little bit about what's going on with our forests in general. So at the bottom there, you'll see that chestnut oak forest, montane oak hickory forest, they're making up 55% of our land base, quite a large amount. A little bit of rich cove, acidic cove that's mixed in there. And the one I want to point out right now is 7% early successional habitat. So we have a huge need for wildlife, non-forest timber products, and a bunch of other more open ground botanicals that we need to provide for. And right now we have 7%. And you saw the map earlier of our slope percentage. The difficulty in finding where to do that and how to do that is quite difficult. And without forest management, we're not doing any of that. And just in general, the top there, just to show you about what our size classes are for most of our timber. So as Mike alluded to, complete harvest of our lands 100 or so years ago, regrowth that is probably anywhere between 30 years and 80 years, and a great deal of high grading that went on between that initial cut and the regrowth. So we have quite a poor structure within some of that, and also losing important species as well. And if you look at the damaging agents of our forest, the tree form is the number one thing. And those of you that went on the tour, you might get to look at that a little bit, but within oak and hickory and multiple other species, a lot of the best was taken, and the ones that are left are poor form and poor growth habit. And then the suppression that's resulted also with that canopy closure from our regenerating trees is causing a problem as well. And then the sapling regeneration in our chestnut oak forest, just as an example, one thing we would really, really like to see on there, and we don't see on there, is white oak. And what we do see is a heck of a lot of soft maple and other miscellaneous species, sourwoods. We do get chestnut oaks. There's a lot of chestnut oak out there. But we need that to skew a little bit differently than it's doing now. So in order to get to this, we're going to start primarily with our reserve within our lands, and we do have some projects that are going on now. Tribal reserve, there's 5 different areas identified: Lickstone, Big Witch. Some of you saw Big Witch yesterday. We had the fire at Big Witch, and Spread Branch, Wolf Laurel, and Jenkins Creek. I didn't zoom out to see all of those, but they're all at high elevation, multiple different habitats, mostly oak, chestnut oak forest or montane hickory oak forest. There is a bit in the Wolf Laurel that would be quite a lot of spruce, which would be unique in these. But we also have possessory holders that are trying to do non-native invasive species work and have done quite a bit of that. We've also done a little bit of that with Big Witch. And we're also going to pilot working with eco-foresters to do a low-cost possessory holder forest management plan. And we'll, as the tribal entity, foot the bill for that at $5 per acre, hopefully at $5 per acre, and then we get the data, and they get a forest management plan, a way to get a little information, a little bit of management done through that. We'll see how that goes. So just as an example, the Lickstone area, we're trying to do multiple things. A lot of this, quite frankly, looks a lot like we're trying to develop a little bit more wildlife habitat. Some road development, which will help for access, but also with linear types of openings. We could do a little bit of travel corridor. What you don't see on that map is that there is a tunnel across the parkway right at the very top. That is a good transit area as it is now. If we can improve habitat around that, that would be great. So we're chipping away. You know, we've done 11.5 acres this winter. We're going to do 11.5 more in the coming months. Seems like a small amount for us. Not a small amount as we're getting some things done. But generally, we're trying to, right now, poke away. We're using contractors to get these things moving forward. And we're just going to keep poking. And Tommy is up next.
Okay, so Tommy Cabe is a tribal member from the Birdtown community of the Eastern Banded Cherokees, a senior employee of the newly evolved EBCI Natural Resource Department. Tommy studied environmental and natural science at several higher education institutions before discovering his interest in forestry. In 2005, Tommy was appointed as the Tribal Forest Resource Specialist, becoming responsible for forest management plan development on the trust lands and on the forested tribal acres. He serves as a liaison in agency-to-agency relationships with the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service for collaboration on traditional ecological knowledge and traditional gathering of certain resources within these adjacent landscapes, and represents the tribe locally and nationally on national resource issues that impact Indian country. Join me in welcoming Tommy Cabe.
Shio Nagadam, I am Tommy Cabe. Welcome to Cherokee. It's been an awesome venue so far, as I've been told. Thank God you're not seeing the things that go on behind the scenes. but it's been a delight to have you all back. The last time I think we hosted ITC was in 2002, and it feels nice to be up here to witness the growth that our department has had. So a little bit about my work history. I started working for my tribe in 2000. there was only like 4 or 5 bodies in the then environmental office. And so now we're up to almost 35 plus in capacity, and we have reshaped the program, and we're doing some awesome things. Still, we're not where we would like to be, but we have definitely made some strong strides here in the last 10 to 15 years. So historically, my role has been, I've been in every position of our department, it seems like, and I kind of woke up one day and come to the realization that I'm the old man in the department. And it kind of seems funny, but it just it allows me to understand how time can quickly go by, and how some of the work that we have done has here lately has really been lightning fast, and opportunities have busted down our doors. And as you can see, we're at low capacity. And this slide is a representation of the latest development within our program. It was the ideal was to, with all these opportunities, we as department people, we're just windows. We're just windows for the voice of our community. And being blessed to be within the ITC families for most of my work career for my tribe, I was very observant in how the extended Indian country had relationships with their community. And when we started getting these opportunities, I referenced back to my visits to Salish Kootenai, to Alaska, to Mescalero and White Mountain Apache, and to Visalia, and to all these awesome places in our country that represent the indigenous framework. And I brought some of that here when we started getting these opportunities to extend our footprint. And the result was the creation of an advisory council, advisory board called Earth Keepers. And when I asked the 10 folks to be a part of this advisory board, without question, they said yes. And all of our Earth Keepers they're all speakers and practitioners of forest products. They all have a vested interest and history of who we are as Kituwa people. And so we started our first meeting by explaining to them the purpose and the intent to get more information from our community through them to help guide us as we develop these agreements with our extended home range. You have seen some of the slides of our extended home range, and we are now in a position to where we're fostering agreements at a federal level to drive our footprint and to re-indigenize the landscape. And it's an awesome opportunity for us to showcase that the wisdom and the knowledge still exist in our community. And it's even awesomer to know that we have youth interests who are coming through the ranks that are going to carry that torch to the next generation. So I want to move this slide to this is a result of, I think we were about a year into our advisory board meetings, our Earthkeeper meetings. And at first it was just the 10 of us and a few programmers. But in this meeting right here, there's almost 35 or 40 people in this room. And that's a result of how the community's voice was impactful. And on our extended home range and the Forest Service lands and the Park Service lands, as Mike and Josh talked about, it got attention. It got attention because the co-stewarding mechanisms of Western science were just not quite cutting it, I don't think. And so when we were asked as a community, something as simple as extraction of a product, of a culturally significant plant by cutting instead of digging, was that reciprocal relationship of understanding and respecting landscapes. And that's why we don't have words like forestry and wildlife and wilderness in our languages. Tom alluded to earlier, is it disconnects and it severs our relationship with land. And so we're at a process now to where we can demonstrate that relationship and include it into science and to some of the Western philosophies. But then there's still some limits. There's still an understanding, and I like to share this story. When we were working with ramps, and some of the botanists and biologists I was working with were saying, well, the ramps are double dormant, and it seemed to drive them crazy. And I started laughing in the field. I was like, well, why is it so important to know? We have respect for that plant, and if it needs to sleep extra hours like we do every now and then, it should be respected, right? So those kind of concepts can be brought into management. Those kind of concepts, can teach us how to have a relationship with landscape in an appropriate fashion to where the next generations could appreciate it. So our earth keepers have been a treasure for us to have the voice of the community. We have Tom Belt is an earth keeper. Tonight when you eat the cultural dinner, it will be prepared by some of the earth keepers. We have a retired Forest Service employee as an earth keeper who's also a linguist and a community leader in our detached community called Snowbird, which is in the western counties of Graham and Cherokee County. And we also have probably your purest form of a Native American ethnobotanist. Her name's Anita Bush. She came up to me a few years ago and she said, I didn't even know what the word ginseng was. I said, you didn't? She said, no. She said, I knew it by this name, and she spit the name out in Cherokee. So that just is a testament of how in the crevices of our community, there's still some valued knowledge about relationships to land. And that is why we created, or asked, we didn't create it, we asked, and without question, they came to the table and have committed to this. And we meet monthly. We've extended that Earth Keepers out to 2 committees now. We have an operations committee and we have a media committee. And we took a resolution before those 2 committees were established, and we got the tribal endorsement. So we're actually cognified by tribal council and the leadership. So it's been a great movement for us so far, and we look forward to some of the things that we would like to accomplish with coast stewarding. So some of the stuff that I think helped set up the interest was Mike mentioned earlier, we hadn't always had a good relationship with our park neighbors. And a few years ago, Vice Chief was actually serving, and I think you delivered the assignment to me to do a ramp prolification project because we had lost an agreement with the park. And we were now tasked with observing how we had a relationship with this plant to get access back. And blindly, I really didn't know what the hell to do with that assignment, but so I started planting 10,000 ramp bulbs in our tribal reserve strategically to kind of go back and evaluate the take process. And this obviously was a long project. And the Forest Service reached out to me. At the time, it was Keir Kelsping at the Southern Research Station. Some of you may know him. He called me, he asked what was going on, and I told him, and he said, would you be interested in more of a collaborative effort so we can take your sustainable take method and monitor it over time at different intervals, and that could justify access back to their ancestral homelands. And I said, sure. I said, well, on one condition, what's in it for the resource? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, we have relationships with plants, and I'm going to have to take this to tribal council, and I'm going to ask these questions. And I want to know how and what you are willing to do. And he said, you tell me. And I said, I want you to change your policy on how all people take these products from the landscape. And so it set up this research for 7 years after that, and we're in 7 years now, to revisit what that would look like on a policy level. Because in the southern Appalachian Mountains, for some of you may know, ramps are a very prized commodity. But they're getting harder and harder to find because people are digging them and they're the newest, latest cool thing to eat from the landscape. So if we are able to do this type of work, then we can sustain these plants and these resources. So that's a testament of where we're at. We're starting to knock on the doors of policy change right now because we have proven that our take method at different intervals of growth yield better sustainable populations after harvest. Mike mentioned the agreement rule with the park. And this is the latest relationship we have with the park. That's our previous Chief Sneed and the Superintendent Cash for the park signing the agreement. And when this was a mere thought, we caught wind of it. And this plant is Sochan. It's equivalent to kale. It's actually more nutritious than kale. We did some nutrition panels on both ramps and Sochan. And the reason we went with Sochan first is because we had already done, some science with this plant, because the way we harvest it is we just take the ends of the leaf. And thanks to North Carolina Arboretum and Dr. Joanne McCoy for looking at our 2 most interesting or most valued spring greens, what were they? And there's Sochan and ramps. And she knew Sochan. And she said, let's do this one first. She said, let's go ahead and start our project with this one because this one's going to be easy. And the way we cultivate, or way we harvest this plant, it actually leads to more seed production. So we just take the tip of it, and it just actually does a lot better. So we went with this plant first with ramps also included in the request. And we are just now starting, this year, we started to have some citizen scientists in our community to go out to these ramp plots and the control sites and start harvesting the ramps in the park. And they're pretty gracious about how much we could take, but like Mike mentioned, the permit process can be a little bit cumbersome. What we have witnessed is that with this harvesting Sochan, some of the permit constraints are going to be loosened. And hopefully within Sochan, we won't have to get a permit. The number did increase from, I think it was 30 permits to 50 this year, and we filled all 50 permits. So and we didn't have to go through the rigorous permit requirements. Some of those were actually loosened too. So again, a testament to how we have developed these partnerships in our extended home range to better understand and better steward the landscape. And the latest thing that I've talked to a little bit on the tour yesterday was the burning efforts. I'll be honest, I was a little jealous of the tribes out west and their cultural burning efforts, and I was like, why the hell can't we do that in Southeast? So I started aggravating Mike, and we need to do something. We need to figure this out, and we just need to burn. And so it started with our basket making interest, and what the ideal is to bring a cultural burning and support cultural burning as compared to prescribed burning, what that means to not only us Katuah Cherokee people, what it also means to southeastern tribes. And there's some interest from the Kachata tribe and the Choctaw Nation to where we're just now starting those discussions. And ultimately it is to understand our relationship with fire that has almost dissipated within the southeastern tribes, right? At least I know with us. Talking to Tom Belt about what that would have meant for us to ignite. Tom told me there was a story in our culture that Lightning and Flint had a fight, and they fought for days. And finally, Lightning, I guess, just delivered the final blow to Flint and scattered Flint throughout the countryside. And I asked Thomas, "Is that why Flint is also black?" He said, "Yes." He said, "So I'm assuming what you're asking is like that ignition, that relationship to fire." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's the story in our culture." But there again, if we wouldn't have been inspired by what some of our extended indigenous brothers and sisters are doing, that story would never been brought to the front to help guide us, in delineating what cultural burn is compared to prescribed burn. So an example of our relationship with land. The top left corner of this slide is bloodroot. The bloodroot, the root itself is used as it's a medicinal, but it's also used as dyeing material for our baskets. And walnuts, there just below that, is also used for dyeing material. So when you look at a Cherokee basket, it's just not white oak, it's a relationship, right? And I'm the one in the office screaming like, no, I don't want a colonial forestry department, something boring. I want something that's more meaningful to who we are as indigenous people. And because it's a relationship, it's reciprocal. It's like our baskets, all these resources. They had a relationship out in the field, and they're serving in a relationship as a utilitarian tool that we can use, to harvest berries. My grandmother carried a basket as a purse for all her life. So that's the kind of concept and framework that I know my headspace stays in a lot of times, and I think I drive Mike and some of my colleagues crazy because they're like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm like, well, let's let the earth keepers just drive this bus. And so we're getting a lot of good valued knowledge about what that means. I mentioned on the field trip that, we had this curiosity about creating a silvicultural practice or silviculture something for white oaks for basketry. And this slide right here is the first meeting of our basket makers, some Southern Research Station folks, and Forest Service folks to go out and have a discussion with the basket makers in the field on what these white oaks look like and how they evaluate them without cutting them down, and what makes a good white oak basket. And this happened probably about 2017 or 18. Backed up that. So the result of that slide was we witnessed two basket makers having a discussion about fire. One basket maker was not wanting to, he was always told that getting a basket tree out of a burn zone was not good. Contrary to what he was saying, we had another basket maker that thought low-intensity burning actually, provided a better split for the tree. And so what you guys seen yesterday on the field tour was the same area before we burnt anything. So it seems to be, the land seems to be telling something in that relationship with the baskets. I shared with you that we had a basket maker to harvest a tree that was skeptical. He didn't know it was burnt, but it turned out that it was a good tree, and I told him it was in a burnt zone. He didn't believe me, but he was happy because, he was kind of changed his mindset about, burning a white oak stand. So another thing that we're excited about here, this slide represents a partnership development that we've talked to, Josh and Mike talked about earlier. You've got us, you got the Conservation Corps, the Park Service, and the Forest Service. And this slide represents our next forest stewards. In this slide, we have Atsi Cooper, she's in the red jacket. We have Avery in the blue shirt. I'm sorry, I can't see Avery guy in the blue shirt down here, standing right behind the conservation badge. And we have Malia Crow, who is working with the Park Service now. She was an educator at our school system. She's in the park uniform. And you got Peyton Bradley somewhere in there. My eyes are on my head, so forgive me. I think he's standing beside the park guy to the back row there. But these three interns came to us this year, and they're our strongest interns yet to come from our community. They're all EBCI members, and we're starting to get a little jealous because they're starting to get recruited by other people, so hands off of them. We're trying to create jobs for them in that work capacity, so I know they're getting anxious for us to develop jobs, but just stand by. We don't want you to take them away from us, so if you're here to recruit our indigenous community, back off. You got to check with us first. But yeah, we could go on. Like when me and Tom was talking earlier, and this is their work. This is Atsi in the river cane patch, learning more about the biological side of river cane, but at the same time, her knowledge about being Katua brings a different concept to that observation. So, but as I was saying just a minute ago, or just a second ago, me and Tom were talking about these stories can go on forever. We can have multiple sessions about these stories, about these concepts. Having platform time in front of an audience, is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But when you take this conversation out into the field and you actually can see and feel what we're talking about, it takes on a different meaning. So I just wanted to share with you that you just got just a fragment of what we know in our community and having a good relationship with our land. And we appreciate your support, and we appreciate you being here, and I hope you guys enjoy tonight's food, because I've been running around trying to make sure it was set up appropriately, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. So with that concludes my presentation. Ski, just thank you, and open the floor for questions.
Do we have any questions? Burning questions? Let me say just a little bit more. I don't know, it seems to be what I do anymore. I always have to say a little more. But I appreciate the work that these three gentlemen are undertaking. I can certainly relate to coming into a situation where limited funding, limited manpower, again, bringing community efforts involved to create those future management goals, regimes, things that are going to be beneficial to our people. We have challenges that a lot of reservations do not, and one of them that was brought up is the possessory holding. The possessory holding comes historically, and this is my understanding. When our tribe was removed in 1838 to Oklahoma, there was a remnant that was allowed to stay back. Being married to a non-tribal person as a woman, you could stay with that family. There were probably land grants given to tribal people for maybe service in the war. Now, these were done through the state. And I like to say there were some of us that they couldn't catch, you know. I mean, it's like anything else. If you go tomorrow, you're going to see some pretty rugged mountains. So it was easy for our people who had been here for generations to know where those hiding areas were. So I like to say we're the guys that couldn't catch. I think components of all those three are true. As time went on, after 1838, 39, our people were displaced, if you will. You can imagine you're not going to tell folks that you're a Cherokee person. Well, you know, they may put you on the trail to Oklahoma. But there was a gentleman named Will Thomas. Will Thomas was not a Cherokee person. He was a store owner down here on the banks of the Oconee-Lefty River. But he was a large landowner, so he allowed our people to live on his property as our people were able to buy parts of land. He would take it in his name. As a non-tribal person, he could hold that title. So the majority of what now makes up the Qualla boundary came from the deeds of land that Will Thomas accumulated, okay? So what happened, our tribe got a corporate charter under North Carolina in the 1800s, so we became a corporate political body. We still had no federal recognition, but those land assignments, if you will, or land purchases that people had bought, they lived on them. They worked those lands. Some of them could have been small, some could have been large. When the land went into trust in 1924, people had been paying taxes on those properties. So when it went into trust, what happens? It belongs to everybody, correct? I mean, it's communal trust property. But the old timers who had paid taxes on that were like, no, I'm not, I mean, you know, my blood, sweat, and tears went in to purchase it. This is mine. So you've got a tribal organization with tribal community property, so to speak, in the eyes of the federal government, but you had this overlaying thing of taxes being paid. So the tribe came up with an assignment of land called the possessory holding. The possessory holder, the holding was based historically on family land that had been purchased through these many, many, many years ago. And they were assigned that for their use and occupancy. And I think, as Mike said, the tribe retained the timber rights on that possessory holding and retained the mineral rights. So we talk about how much is in common. So the 6,000 acres that that Josh talked about, that is common-owned property. The rest of our land base is assigned through political, tribal assignments based on historical documents. And it's a unique land system of assignment of property, but from a management standpoint, it's a nightmare. When I got here, you know, in 1983, it was very difficult to wrap your management thoughts around 1,000 2,000, 5,000 possessory holdings that the federal government had trust responsibility on. The 6,000 acres of communal land was easy, you know? It was one block, one area. So the challenges that they face are as real today as they were 40 years ago, from a management standpoint. I think our people, as they have lived and occupied these areas, some are 1 acre up to several hundred acres in size, they themselves have been good stewards for the most part. So there's opportunities there, I believe, to do some, as Tommy pointed out, there's some possessory holders who now are allowing these practices onto their possessory holding. Maybe they're the test case, and the neighbor will say, hey, that's pretty good, I like that. You know, then it will grow and become part of a new culture of land management with the possessory holders' input. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of history of the possessory holding. Unique in your country. The Bureau of Indian Affairs goes crazy. They just can't wrap their mind around how sophisticated the Cherokee was in allowing this thing to progress and work.